And I wish, I don't like to call people's names specifically, but there's a young man he's behind me at some point, and he's going to represent himself. In our ministry, that when I came into the ministry, and I was pushing and saying we had all these grand plans, he looked at me as one with entire disbelief. And I said, "Why aren't you excited? This is your area." He said, "I've heard it all before." I said, "But we are pushing now to really start our exploration." He said, "I've heard it all before." Well, Madam Chair, I will be happy to say that I saw him smile for the first time last week when we got $11 million as the effective signing bonus from BHP Billiton. So, Madam Chair, a lot has happened. With respect to water, I guess I will cover more of it in the actual questions. With respect to water itself, Madam Chair, we recently had a Find All and Fix All extended hours program where we had 11,000 complaints logged into our system. Some of them were duplicates. We actually did not know how many bursts had been reported, and we systematically set about to locate every single one and fix it. And what is really great about that initiative is we allowed the workers themselves, the Barbados Workers Union and the workers, to design their work program, to cost it out, to give us the deadlines, give us the deliverables, and we put it in their hands, and they came through with flying colors. And that is a perfect example of what happens when labor, management, and the political will happen to collide together. So, thank you. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to say that whereas up to a couple months ago you had people saying, "I reported this pipe 2 years ago, burst, and nobody's come to fix it," or "This thing has been running for the last 4 weeks and nobody's come to fix it," we are current now with all of the burst reports in Barbados. So anything we are fixing now is something that was reported within the last 24 hours. And we have now our mains fixing. If in event of a large main, we are fixing those within 24 hours. As was evidenced by the massive one we found in St. Philip, we found that. To be honest, normally I understand it would have taken about 7 days to fix that, but that was dealt with within 24 hours. So a lot has happened. There's a lot more to do. Our estimates reflect a cut over last year. But Madam Chair, we are aware that things are not where we want them to be at this moment, and we have to work within constraints. But our ministry has shown some initiative, and it's shown its ability to do a lot with a little. And I'm expecting that this year, Madam Chair, we will do the most with the least. So I open, Madam Chair, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'd like to move it at the headstand part.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your opening presentation and for your presence here and that of your team. Ma'am, I would have noted before me some issues which I consider to be of significance and to which perhaps I would have spoken this afternoon and would have asked to have addressed. These include the matter of the harsh impact of water rates on Barbadians, both individuals as well as businesses. And there are water rates, irrespective of what we choose to call them or how we choose to characterize them. They are seen as increases in water rates having a telling effect negatively upon the pockets of individuals, business. I would have wanted to raise some issues about the Barbados Water Authority and the arrangements with Innotech, outages in rural Barbados which persists, especially in a context where we are anticipating further drought conditions. The mains repair program of the Barbados Water Authority. I wanted to have raised perhaps some issues relative to the FTC position of ratings relative to energy in Barbados, issues relative to South Coast sewage operations, the update on that. I haven't heard much on that for a while. Certainly, I would have wanted to hear something on the arrangements further with Trinidad with respect to oil exploration. Would have been important that I raise the matter of the BLMP capacity, especially in light of what the Honourable Minister just intimated, and the whole issue of moving away from monopoly in the energy sector in Barbados. Then, of course, we have to consider the building and building out of a green energy architecture in Barbados, and potentially how we will capitalize, or the government will assist in capitalizing domestic investment in renewables in Barbados. These and some other issues. But Madam Chair, and this is not with any disrespect to this Honourable Minister, because he's always been kind and considerate of me and has always been accommodating with me, and no disrespect to his team either. But I have chosen to send a signal again, not for the first time to this government, that it must behave itself better, because it would have been courteous if the opposition could have been advised that perhaps we will be looking at the estimates relative to this ministry on this day. Nobody in the cabinet has spoken to me of that. I know the absence of the substantive leader of government business, and I presume, therefore, she may be off island, and in recent times she has been keeping me up to date. The Honourable Member for the City, our Minister of Health, deputizes for her in that capacity, and I have not seen much of him today, and I imagine he's busy with matters of COVID-19, and that is totally understandable. And the Honourable Member for St. James North is standing in today, and perhaps he himself may not have been sufficiently and early advised. But it is not good that we continue to do this. It may be an opposition of 1 against 28 or 29. It may be that there are, 41 voices for the government in the Parliament of Barbados, and 9 on the part of the opposition. But I think when we come to matters of the people's business of this serious import, we really have to be a bit more professional in this. And I came in here this morning with an understanding that we would continue with the Ministry of Youth Affairs, and we duly did, and that perhaps we would hear from the Ministry of Innovation and Smart Technology, I think that's what it is, and possibly the Ministry of Elder Affairs and Empowerment. It was you, Madam Chair, who in a private aside advised me on my query that we may be doing energy, and therefore I've had no time properly to prepare for this debate, as should be the case. Now, out of regard for my honourable colleague, the Minister, who works hard to get the job done, and out of respect for the team, I could go on to pose some of these issues and raise these questions with you. We can have an exchange on these. These are important matters. But this government must understand that it cannot continue to do this nonsense. Numbers do not give you the right to do this. On that basis, Madam Chair, that's the last word you'll hear from me in this particular matter.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Before I start, allow me please to introduce those who are behind me at this point. Because my ministry is so extensive and has so many departments under it, there are others here who are not presently there, but as the circumstances arrive, we will swap in and out. But I'll just advise as to who's behind me now. On my right is Ms. Francine Blackman, the Permanent Secretary in our ministry. On my left is Permanent Secretary Andrew Gittins, who's also attached to the ministry and is responsible for the execution of the 2030 renewable energy goal. Ma'am, there's Mr. James Brown, who's the CEO of BNOC and MPC. The General Manager of Barbados Water Authority, Mr. Keith Roy Halliday. Mr. Brian Haynes, the Chief Project Analyst in the ministry. Ms. Keisha Reed, Project Manager in the ministry. Mr. Jamar White, Director of Natural Resources in the ministry. Dr. John Mwanza, who is with the Barbados Water Authority. Dr. Hugh Seeley, who is a Special Advisor to the government on energy matters, but he also works in conjunction with us on Water Authority matters. Mr. Charles Leslie, engineer from the Barbados Water Authority, senior engineer. And Director of Engineering, and Mr. William Hines, who's the Chief Energy Officer at the Ministry. Madam Chair, if I might just address the concerns, the stated concerns of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
But, Madam Chair, point of order, with your leave, I did not put those concerns before the Minister or before the committee. I said if I were to have participated in the debate, these are issues perhaps to which I would have loved to have spoken, but I have not so done. Now, the Minister can proceed to respond if he chooses, but he should not take my departure from the chamber as a personal disrespect to him. But I'm not participating in this debate on this head for the reasons I've stated.
So, Madam Chair, having the Leader of the Opposition having stated his position, I would appreciate some guidance as to which you would prefer me to address the comments that were raised by the Leader of the Opposition, obiter dicta, as it would appear, or if I should proceed to take other questions. I'd quite happily address the concerns for so long as he's in the chamber.
Madam Chair, if I may be allowed to speak from this position.
Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Yes. I really don't think that there's any substance in anything that the Leader of the Opposition has said. I've been in this Parliament now 30 years, and I would say that this is the first occasion that I've seen such close collaboration between a government and the Leader of the Opposition in terms of what heads should be called. There were occasions when I was in opposition, and we only knew when the heads were being called, when they were called. So I cannot see the purpose of his intervention.
Thanks, Honourable Member. I would rather you go on to questioning. Let's start with the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to firstly let me commend the Minister for his excellent work. I think that he's one of the hardest working ministers I have come across, and I want to commend him for that. My question relates to the opening statement that he made in his preamble when he spoke to his vision, and certainly the vision of this entire government, to bring this country to a carbon neutral fossil fuel realization by 2030. The reality is that the world is now being threatened with the increase of carbon dioxide and the greenhouse effect, therefore having an impact as it relates to global warming. In 2019, 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide was produced. 37 billion tons, causing the levels in North America certainly around May, June to raise to 417 parts per million. In Barbados, it was just over 400 parts per million. I'm not being pedantic. This is as dangerous as it gets, and it forms a serious existential threat to life as we know it. I just want the Minister to enumerate for us those in earshot and eyeshot so that we can have a graphic understanding, a lucid understanding of how you intend to roll out this plan, which I'm certainly in full support of over the next coming months, years. I want you to be able to talk this country through this plan, because I feel that this is the most important plan for the development, certainly, and the sustainability of this little country, Barbados. So if you can enumerate for us, I would muchly appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to provide some context, right before the domination of the press by the coronavirus, what was dominating the press was climate change. And everybody everywhere is talking about it. If you think about it, Madam Chair, from the glaciers that formed in the Arctic and Antarctic, those took millions of years to form. But because of the increase in global temperatures, those same glaciers are melting, and it's affecting everything. It's affecting the levels of the sea, it's affecting natural habitats, it's affecting weather patterns, and what took millions of years to do is being undone in the space of 10 years. So even if we autocorrect now, let's say we got back to pre-10 years ago levels of consumption, levels of greenhouse gases, the temperatures that existed 10 years ago, it would take another couple of millions of years for the glaciers to put themselves, but for the Earth to rebalance. That's why it's important. Madam Chair, what does it entail? It entails a complete wiping away of the way that we do everything. In the same way that we are familiar with the internal combustion engine and we take it for granted that a car runs on gas, in the next 5 to 10 years, people coming up are going to take it for granted that a car runs on electricity. People in the world are still burning coal. The world itself, Madam Chair, has come to a position, the countries of the world came to a position that they're willing to tolerate no more than a 2% increase over the temperatures that existed at the beginning of the industrial age. Now, Madam Chair, a 2% increase in temperatures, if it happens, let's put it practically into context. That would result in a sea level rise of between 0.6 of a meter and 1 meter. What does that mean? That means the whole of Browns Beach, the beach I think that was recently voted one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, would disappear. That means, Madam Chair, that the QEH will be in water. That means that most of our hotel plants in Barbados and the whole West Coast will be underwater. That means Bridgetown would be underwater. And when I say a 2-degree rise, Madam Chair, I mean a 2-degree rise in temperature, in atmospheric temperature. Now, why are we getting to this point? Over the last 18 months, rather than slowing down, we've actually been increasing greenhouse gases. If we continue at this rate, the 2-degree rise that we expected to happen in around 2050 is going to happen by 2030. So I'm trying to explain to people everywhere I go that it is actually indeed a desperate situation. If even we take the guidance from the weather patterns, once upon a time, Madam Chair, the hurricanes always came off the African coast, and we spent 6 months of the year watching the satellite imagery, and we're watching for how the weather patterns move, and we're looking to see if it's coming to Barbados, if it's below Barbados, if it's above Barbados, because it always turns right. It goes to the island chain, moves at the island chain, and swings right just before the United States. Last hurricane season, a hurricane came off the African coast and turned right and went straight for Ireland. They never contemplated it would head in the direction of the United Kingdom. But the weather patterns are actually so unstable now that no one knows what to expect. And if that is now, imagine 5 years from now, or imagine 10 years from now. What does 2030 look like for us? Every single light, the fluorescent lights we have there, every single light would be LED or something less energy consuming than that. All of our generation from electricity would be by renewable sources. There'll be no burning of coal, no burning of heavy fuel oils, nothing. In Barbados, we'll likely be generating electricity entirely from solar, from wind, or from wave technology, which is the developing technology. While solar is a good fit for Barbados, and we tend to have sunshine year-round, the fact is we are a land-scarce country, and solar technology is land-greedy. So the amount of space that you require to take up to generate a megawatt of electricity using a wind turbine, you probably need 10, 15, 20 times the fall space of the same turbine to generate the same amount of electricity, if that puts it in context for you. So For Barbados to sustain ourselves, if we had to go solely, if our energy mix consisted solely of solar panels, Madam Chair, you'd be able to see us from space, we look like one big mirror. We simply don't have the space to put down the amount of solar panels needed to power Barbados. Our consumption now at peak capacity, I believe, is 150-something megawatts. If we do go to full electrification of Barbados, then we're looking at a peak capacity of around about 600 to 700 megawatts, because don't forget, all of the buses, all of the cars, everything that now runs on gas is going to run on electricity. So you're not going to have to generate that much more electricity, but we can't afford to generate that much more electricity by burning fossil fuels, because then we're just accelerating the problem. So we're looking at the switch out and energy efficiency. So a number of programs in our ministry, a number of the projects in our ministry concentrate not just on the generation of electricity from renewable sources, but also looking at doing energy efficiency audits in the ministries. We look at how can you retrofit a building and use half of the amount of electricity, right, to generate effectively twice as much power. We're looking at how can we reduce the electricity bill for the Water Authority by using solar PV or using wind turbines or biomass. Biomass is also in our mix. So we're looking at every single source of energy for generation that can work in a small country that is renewable, that we can go to again and again and again. So we produce more electricity at a significantly lesser cost. I like to use this example, Madam Chair. When we were children, used to watch the Jetsons. The Prime Minister used to talk about the Jetsons, so I'll talk about the Jetsons. You saw floating cars, and you said that would never happen. You saw people talking into their phone. You said that would never happen. Somebody watching something in their hand, like a television, and you said that would never happen. Madam Chair, I just came through Miami. Nobody walks in Miami City anymore. They're the same scooters we built as little children that had a long handle, and you had two little wheels, one in front, one in back, and you sit down and you push yourself by one foot. Those scooters are now being handled by Uber, by Lyft. The transportation companies have the scooters. You go and you touch your cell phone to it, or you touch your credit card to the front of it, and you get on, you ride it till you get where you're going, and then you leave it right there and proceed. And the next person who wants it picks it up from there, right? Electric skateboards, Madam Chair, electric bicycles. The face of the electric mobility has changed, and we keep saying like down the road, down the road, down the road. It's not down the road. It is actually now. So we now need to put ourselves ahead of that curve. Our reality is that within 5 years, all of the advertisements that you see for vehicles on TV, on cable, we Barbadians, we like to follow. We like to do what the big countries are doing. So we want that SUV that we saw in the Super Bowl halftime advertisement, right? But in 5 years, all of those are going to be electric. We have started, the Ministry of Transport has procured 30 electric buses. Our ministry is also procuring 2 electric buses to use as a pilot to test the effect of the electric buses on the grids. But we're going that direction. Barbados itself, last year, had the 3rd highest penetration per capita of electric vehicles in the world. That's a major feat. It's 300 vehicles, but Jamaica has 6 electric vehicles. We have charging ports everywhere. In the States, charging ports are a big issue. They don't have sufficient charging ports, but we're ahead of the curve. All we need to do is to make them a little bit more affordable, Madam Chair, and we'll get to where we're going. But I just hope that that created a picture of what 2030 Barbados looks like and what we actually need to do to get where we want to get.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Minister, I want to begin by publicly thanking you, because on 3 separate occasions during the course of the last financial year, you would have personally and physically made yourself available to join me in my constituency and to come to the rescue of my constituents, who, through no fault of their own, have been confronted with some severe challenges in terms of access to water in areas like Redmond Village and Qlan, Welches, Arch Hall, Seaview, And may I also say that, you know, across the upper elevations of St. Thomas, because even though Melrose is not part of my constituency, they are right next door and part of the challenges over there. I think, Minister, it would be a useful thing if you could use this opportunity to speak to this Parliament and by extension to the country as to some of the causative factors behind the challenges that continue to replicate themselves, and more expansively on what are the solutions which are being implemented by your ministry and its technical officials.
Honourable Member, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, but I'll take the opportunity to call somebody else. I'd like to call Dr. John Manza.
Good afternoon. Essentially, the water supply issues that have been raised are a result of two significant components. One is the aging infrastructure, and two is the available water resources. For example, if you look at the Shop Hill system and the system that supplies Castle Grant, which supplies the upper areas of St. Thomas, St. Joseph, St. John, and St. Andrew. Those systems, the majority of the water mains in there would be small diameter mains, 3-inch diameter, which are no longer produced. The other diameters would be old-sized mains, like 7-inch. If you go from Rock Hall, St. Andrew, stay on top of that ridge, past Epps Hill, right into St. Thomas, Rock Hall in St. Thomas. We have a 7-inch main that runs on that ridge, which, again, tells you how old the main is, because they no longer produce 7-inch mains. Now, those areas, the water that is supplied to those areas is essentially pumped from the lower elevations. So we would be pumping water from the coastline, where our water wells are, Molineux, Trents, Carlton, Ashton Hall, Allendale, which are all lifting water inland. And because you are lifting water from the lower elevations, that water floats on top of seawater. So anytime you have a reduction in rainfall, the water that floats on the seawater is thinner, and you start pumping seawater. So when you have drought situations like we have had the last couple of years, when you overpump those wells, the water will become salty. And the only way you could address them is to reduce the amount of water that you are pumping or stop pumping altogether. Now, recently, we upgraded the desalination plant that is operated by Ionics at Spring Garden by 50%. And in addition to that, we constructed a new pumping station next to St. James Secondary School, and also replaced and installed a new main from to St. Stephen's Reservoir. What that has done is that we are now able to push some of that additional supply from Ionics to Trents, and from Trents that is pumped across Highway 2A to Lancaster, and from Lancaster is pumped to Epps Hill, where we have another pumping station, and that then pumps the water into the Castle Grant system to feed the high elevations. So with that, we would have seen some relief in the amount of water outages, because we are pushing an additional 5 million gallons a day. For the Shop Hill system, which is along Highway 2A, the same water that we are pumping from Trents Some of that is being diverted along Highway 2A to feed the Shop Hill system, which extends right up to Flat Rock in St. George. And that has provided some relief to those residents. Unfortunately, that system alone cannot meet the demand. So the additional supplies actually come from Upperwards, Bomaston, and Sweetville. Now, the wells that are on the coastline, the major issue that we have with them is salt water increasing in the fresh water. For the Upperwards, Sweetville, Bomaston, and Sweetville, Upperwards, and Bomaston. Those areas, they don't have salt water underneath them. What we experience is a reduction in water level. And so when the water level drops, we also get a reduction in the amount of water that we can pump. For example, recently, as late as in November last year, we went into the cave at Bomaston. I'm not a tall man, by all any means. When we go into Bomaston Cave, I cannot walk in the section where we have dammed the water. The water will be above my head. The first time we went in there, the water was up to my waistline. And my waistline is probably about 3 feet. That's how low the water level had dropped. We went back there 2 weeks later. There was a change in water level because we had some rainfall that fell that weekend. But that would not last because that was like a flash flood. Normally you are depending on the whole catchment contributing. And during the rainy season, what we should be seeing on average in that cave is up to about 19 feet of water. And that November was the end of the rainy season. So we should be seeing the most contribution from the rainy season. And that was where the first time we went in, it was only about 3 feet deep. So the impact of the reduction in rainfall due to drought has been very heavy, and unfortunately, we expect that impact to continue into the next rainy season. And unless we get a reprieve in the rainy season, we could expect that the impacts of the drought will continue.
Chair, I want to thank Dr. Mwansa for his elucidation of the problem. I go back to my constituency because while Dr. Mwansa, it is obviously a good thing that you can now pump an additional 5 million gallons a day. I am sensing in parts of Redmond Village and Q-Land, for example, that there's still a frequency of outages. And my question then to you is, to help the ordinary man understand the challenge, is it then likely that you are pumping 5 million gallons a day into old mains and that there's a consequential likelihood that ongoing outages are related to the quality of the mains? And if so, if that is correct, could you then elaborate a little bit on the question of your mains replacement and in fact, not only the replacement and maintenance of mains, but I would imagine also the question of the maintenance and the condition of your reservoirs?
Over the years, the BW has been substantially constrained by access to funding for its works. The existing network, as the minister explained before, is an aged infrastructure which needs replacing. Now, it cannot be done in one sweep. recognizing the difficulties that we've been experiencing in the higher elevations of the island, we actually solicited funding from the CDB. And we have had a targeted mains replacement program, which has started from the Bomaston area, which is the area where we're trying to get that water into Golden Ridge system to pump to Casa Grande. So if you have been on the road, you'd have probably seen the mains that we have replaced in St. John, and we're currently working on the main there from Colleton to Messiah Street. We just replaced the main in Welshtown. We have replaced the main from St. John Primary School right down to Port House. And so we have a targeted mains replacement program, which will allow us, with that additional supply that we're putting in the system, to retain it and not lose it as part of the leakage. Additionally, we have a loan program that we are currently almost ready to sign with the European Investment Bank. The mains program for that is actually targeted in the area between Golden Ridge and Casa Grande Reservoir, because we realized when we are able to pump consistently from the Trans, Epsil, Lancaster system into Casa Grande, the minute we start seeing recovery in the Casa Grande Reservoir, we actually experience burst mains in that area, and the supply will drop. So we know that we could, with the amount that we are producing now, we could do better in terms of consistency in supply if we also are able to stabilize the bursts that are occurring in the area supplied by the water that we are talking about.
My final question, again, is the authority now ascertain exactly where when the first main takes place, or is it still a situation where you have to wait to see moisture come to the surface, and then it can be put through? And is there any technology which does exist in your knowledge that might assist you in being able to identify a rupture in the main and therefore take early measures to correct that?
There are various ways you could get an indication of a burst main. At the pumping station, we have pressure gauges that we are supposed to maintain a particular pressure. And so when we see a drop in pressure, it could be an indication of a burst main. Additionally, we have situations where we are entirely dependent on the customers telling us when they see a burst main with water running on the surface. We will be made aware and will know that we have a burst main. But there are some bursts that will never come up to the surface because the coral rock is such that the water will go into the coral rock rather than rise up to the surface. Now, to address those bursts, we have technology. In fact, we have up-to-date technology, the latest available on the market. But because of the fact that we don't have that technology installed permanently across the island, what we actually end up doing is that when a problem is reported, we will deploy that equipment in that area. And there's a piece of equipment called a data logger, which we will put on fixtures that are attached to the water mains. And when we drive through those areas, we'll get an indication as to which of those loggers are identifying a leak in the system. And with that, we are in a position to isolate the area where that burst main might be. And then there are two ways to finally pinpoint the location of the main. We have an equipment that is called a noise correlator, where again you go and put two loggers on either side of where you suspect the leak to be. And they will calculate where from each logger, the distance from each logger, where the leak is. So you are in a position to go there and dig at that location. The other alternative is that we have workmen who move along the path of the water main with headphones. And they'll be sounding along the pipe and listening for noise until they hear the gushing noise from the pipe. That way, again, you would have pinpointed the location of the burst main. So we are, at this point, still dependent a lot on the customer telling us they have experienced water outage. But when we do find out from the customer, and if it's not coming up to the surface, we have equipment to locate where the leak might be.
Just one thing, Madam Chair, just by way of further explanation, the exact same piece of equipment that they use to sound along the length of the pipe is the same piece of equipment that, for example, if you have an extra high water bill and you suspect that you have a leak underground in your premises, that we would, our non-revenue department would come and sound along your premises to try to find the leak that you may not even know exists.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Chairperson. Minister, Honourable Minister, I wish to commend you first in terms of the leadership that you have brought to your ministry. You had to hit the ground running because one of the mission criticals fell squarely in your ministry, the storage that would have been running. In fact, on the location at which we are sited at present, right here. 2 years ago, and within a very short space of time, I think 6 weeks or so, you and your team, of course, because you couldn't do it alone, was able to resolve a problem that the previous government for 2.5 years was unable to resolve. And you know, you have done your country, you and your team, a national service in that regard. But want to address the issue of the Water Authority, which is a program, I think, 542 under your head. And of course, the Water Authority under your ministry was one of the corporations that really and truly was raped literally and figuratively by the last government. Legal fees, horrendous legal fees, $1.4 million charged to by a friend of the Prime Minister, for instance, and legal partner for reading.
On a point of order, ma'am, I hate to interrupt my honourable friend, but I think he wants to say a friend of the former Prime Minister.
Okay. My greatest apologies, of course. Friend of the former Prime Minister. Friend and legal partner for reading 3 documents and signing 2, going to 2 meetings. And of course, in terms of construction projects, well documented, some of which the minister, the then minister, former minister of Water Resources and Agriculture, as the ministry was then styled, would have been personally involved in as well as a director. And therefore, you have had to, at least this department has had to I believe, caught with a debt of about $70 million at one time, a debt that has been restructured to some extent. And I would first want to ask Minister, in terms of if you can, to give you an opportunity here in this Parliament to report to this Parliament and to the country and the wider world the progress made in restructuring the debt of the Water Authority, and especially in relation to the companies that had been granted very favorable contractual terms.
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask the Chairman of the Barbados Water Authority, Ms. Leodine Worrell, Mrs. Leodine Worrell, to deal with that one because she was the person at the forefront of those negotiations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Barbados Water Authority was indeed faced with a number of onerous contracts. We've just concluded negotiations in relation to some. The review of 20 contracts only indicated that the Barbados Water Authority would have actually been obligated to a $1.5 billion debt, which would have increased our expenditure.
What was that number again?
$1.5 billion out of 20 contracts. And it would have increased our monthly, it would have increased our expenditure to roughly an additional $93 million a year. Most of these contracts did not go out to tender. Indeed, most of these contracts were in fact unknown to even the senior management within the Water Authority. The contracts were either signed by the then chairman and the members of the board. They were contracts that were either given by directives, but whether ministerial or from a chairman's perspective. In our investigations, we also found out that the members of the board actually, with regard to the building itself, basically signed a resolution that gave their voting power to the then executive chairman, Dr. Atlee Braffett, and therefore, even to a large extent, not that it in any way alleviates the fiduciary and other obligations of the directors, but a lot of decisions, therefore, did not even reach the stage of management's understanding. Along with Mr. Mr. David Nagoski of White Oak, and my critical team, which is made up of the general manager, Keith Roy Halliday, Dr. John Mwanza, Charles Leslie, and Elvin Jordan. We basically worked together to reduce the expenditure and the exposure to the Barbados Water Authority by roughly 63 or 65%.
Just one second, Minister. Just because knowing you as well as they do, I'm going to answer your next question. Our negotiated settlement and the resolution of those contracts are without prejudice to the right to take legal action if warranted due to illegality or other measures or other circumstances. So the Barbados Water Authority has settled some of the most egregious of the contracts, but reserves its rights to under the law.
Madam Chair, thank you. What has just been disclosed to this Parliament shows why the Cabinet of Barbados and the Attorney General, Honourable Attorney General specifically, has directed that an investigation be carried out forensically on the operations of the Barbados Water Authority during the 10 lost years of the last administration, because the current expenditure for which this Parliament is being asked to vote for the next financial year, $2.22 billion. The total revenue just over $3 billion, and we're hearing that one statutory authority was allowed to incur debt of $1.5 billion, $1.66 billion to be exact. This, of course, impacted, Minister, on the program of water storage devices, water tanks at private homes, businesses, etc. I know that you and your management team would have promised incentives for as many households as possible in Barbados to install water tanks, especially in an era where you're under pressure, we are under pressure in terms of rainfall capacity and water outages in Barbados. And where can you give this Parliament a present status position on this, the ability of the authority to give incentives so people can install their own water tanks for when you have the water outages? And also, Minister, with that also a report on what was the position of the previous government in terms of the arrangements they had made with any contractor on installing water tanks, and at what cost that was to the authority.
Before I turn the details over to Ms. Worrell, allow me to just say this. As I said at the beginning, 2030 is going to look a lot different to all of us. The way we do things now are not going to be the way we do things going forward. We've had a couple years of drought, with this year being the worst one in the last 60 years. The rainfall patterns are predicted to be more erratic than they have been. And so we're looking at a situation where, in the same way that the Water Authority needs to become independent of the power generation utility, Barbadians need as well to do what it is that they have to do in order to secure the water for themselves. So if the water from the main goes off and you have no tank, you feel it immediately for as long as that disruption lasts. If you have a tank, then you may not even feel it at all. So we're getting to a situation where the water system globally is becoming a little bit more unreliable because of rainfall patterns. The fact is, it's incumbent upon all of us to do what it is that we have to do to protect our own supply and to minimize the disruption to ourselves when those disruptions do occur. So I just wanted to put that framework there, because we have to get to a point where everybody has a tank. We have to get to a point where people store rainwater, but also have potable water tanks to allow that buffer in the event that there's a disruption in the water supply. So I just want to put that context before directing the particulars of it to Ms. Worrell.
Yes, Madam Chair. As Dr. Mwanza would have indicated, for years, and I mean years, the Barbados Water Authority has not been the recipient of any funding. As I would have indicated previously, as a matter of fact, whatever funds we had were actually depleted. And as such, we find ourselves in a very precarious position as it relates to our ability financially to move forward on a number of ideas and a number of plans that we have. With regard to the personal tank program raised by Minister Hinkson, The Barbados Water Authority has been, for the last couple of weeks, actually been in negotiations with the Ministry of Finance, in particular with the DFE, Dr. Ambassador Clyde Maskell, as well as Dr. Kevin Greenidge and David Nagoski of White Oaks, seeing how we can best set up to address what we have identified as being the 10 major issues facing the country and that needs to be addressed, of which the tank supply program is one. The negotiations have been quite fruitful thus far, and at this point in time, I'm not in a position really to give further details as they are unfolding every day as we speak. As recent as today, Dr. Maskell came and spent some time with the Finance Department at the Barbados Water Authority to best see how we can set it up, because the program that existed before certainly did not meet the standard or the test of reasonableness as anyone may define it to be.
What I will say, Honourable Member, is that the ultimate details of it are still being worked on, but what is envisioned is the Water Authority having a pre-approved set of contractors, not one or two, but having a list of pre-approved contractors, set prices for the installation of the proper installation of the tanks and pumps, because if they install badly, then it can cause a stagnation in the tank or other issues that complicate things even further. But the proper installation of the tanks and the pumps, and the customer be able, where necessary, to net it off, to pay it off over a period of time on the bill. So if you can't afford, let's say the cost is $1,000. That's not what it's going to be, but let's say, this for ease of creating a figure. Let's say the cost is $1,000, and you can't afford to pay $1,000 up front. The Barbados Water Authority, through its program, will be able to provide the tank for you, and you may pay that $1,000 back over payments of $50 a month for 20 months. So that is the envisioned framework to make it as accessible and as easy as possible with the lowest possible interest and cost of installation, so that it is not out of the reach of everyone. Of course, especially where you have situations of the most vulnerable people, then the Water Authority will be prepared to make certain concessions to make sure that they're protected as well. So we accept that being without water is a most disruptive thing. You can be without energy, you can be without clothes, you can be without many things, TV. You can't survive long without water. So part of our mandate is to ensure that everybody has access to potable water. So where we have to create special programs or make special concessions where the circumstances of the individuals so warrant, and the Water Authority is going to be prepared to do it. We're looking to roll out our plan as quickly as possible, and the details will be forthcoming once we have settled them. But it is going to be done in the shortest possible time, and it is going to be a simple process. No lot of red tape, no lot of long talk. Once you require a tank, and we have the tanks available, then we're going to install the tank for you and work out the terms. All right, work out the terms and install the tank for you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairperson. My final question is more related to the community level burst water pipes. And, you know, when the previous government, the last government, increased water rates in 2009 by 60%, I think that most of the general population, took it at heart, because we were told by that government that this money would be used to replace the archaic 100-year-old, 100-plus-year-old pipe system in Barbados, which was mentioned earlier on in the debate. That was not done, and therefore, Honourable Minister, you preside over a major challenge. Burst pipes, I could speak for myself. Hardly a week passes that a constituent doesn't call me, or I myself, when I'm driving in my constituency, see a burst pipe and immediately call, or WhatsApp one of your senior management at the authority. And I must say, whenever I make that intervention, there is a response. Although my constituents invariably say that for 2-3 weeks they call or report and there's no response. And the fact, though, Minister, is that you might repair the burst pipe here and then next week you get a burst pipe 50 meters down the road. That's the reality, I suppose, of having 100-year plus pipes. And I know Dr. Wanza spoke a bit in terms of the challenge, but I'm just wondering what strategic plan your ministry has in terms of replacing these burst pipes over the period of time, knowing full well, Minister, that this is millions and millions and millions of dollars that we're talking about.
I think I remember hearing the answer to that question when the Honourable Member for St. James Central would have asked it.
The financing, the financing capacity.
Financing?
Right, that's what I meant. I think he spoke more in terms of the infrastructure.
From the point of view of finance.
But
Honourable Member, the Cabinet had decided, and the government has a stated policy, that in the renewable energy space is going to be a carve-out for the Barbados Water Authority of between 15 and 25%. So what is intended in that space is that the Water Authority will have a guaranteed reserved space in the renewable energy industry that it can enter or use of its own accord to generate income, or in partnership with somebody else as an investment opportunity. And the funds from that carve-out are intended to be used in the mains replacement progress, to have a continuous mains replacement process. The reality is that we have, in Barbados, we have 2,500 kilometers of water mains. The estimated cost of replacing a kilometer of water main, that is trenching, taking it up, replacing it, reinstating, is $1 million. So if we were to replace all of the water mains in Barbados, we'd be looking at $2.5 billion. So this is not something that the Water Authority is in a position to do, and I guess that's why it has not been done yet. But once we get the intended program up and running and get into that space, then you will have a steady return from the utility who is purchasing, because they operate on a buy all, sell all. So when you generate electricity, they buy it all, and then they sell it back to you, or they sell it, push it to the grid. So most people get a check at the end of the month, and we're dependent on that check at the end of every month to actually keep our mains replacement program going. So that is the current contingency in relation to that. We believe it's going to work because, as I said, the returns right now in the renewable energy space are quite generous. So that is the position to do the mains replacement program. We have a number of other loans or grants that are as well in train, that are dealing with specific areas of replacement. So there's mains replacement going on now, but those are for specific projects. We can't keep approaching it piecemeal because it is too widespread to tackle it that way. So we have to be able to have a continuous, ongoing mains replacement program, and that is how we expect to fund it.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael's South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, to you and your team. You know, when the opposition leader spoke, well, if he had spoken, when he was speaking, he said if he had spoken, he would have asked you about the cost of water. And I think that was in relation to what people see on the bills. So perhaps if you could explain that. And he said he would also have asked you about the South Coast. So if you could give an update on that and our general overall plans for sewage entirely. And then I have my own questions.
Oh, so you're asking for the Honourable Member of the Opposition?
Well, I believe they're important questions, and the Minister was about to respond. I did not want to deny him the opportunity,
But
nor would I
one
wish
would
to have
consider
it
them to
left
be
as
your
an unanswered question.
So you want 6 questions? Go ahead, Honourable Member.
I'm going to ask Charles Leslie. take this one. Really costly water. The costly water generally.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. In response to the question, basically, the cost of water is we had increase in the rate of the tariffs, but basically a proportion of that money is going directly towards the sewage, and a proportion is going to the garbage. The proportion that comes to the sewage basically is going to be used for the upgrade and the maintenance of our sewer systems. Over the last couple of months, we've been doing a number of upgrades to our sewage treatment plant. At the South Coast, for instance, we would have replaced the screens. At the Bridgetown sewage plant, we would have also replaced screens. We've been making upgrades in terms of the replacement of blowers. We would have done upgrades to our treatment processes. So the monies that are coming from that garbage and sewage revenue is basically used to upgrade our treatment plants and to maintain our wastewater systems. We would have done some repairs to the networks on the South Coast, especially. We would have done cleaning of our Bridgetown network, and it's a continuous process. Our wastewater treatment systems and the networks have been neglected over the years because of the lack of funding. And the monies that we are currently collecting from that garbage and sewage allowance is basically being used to bring those two plants and the network, as well as the networks, up to a reasonable standard. So, thank you.
Madam Chair, just one other thing. I think directly relating to the honourable member's question. Right now, Barbados has among the cheapest water in the world. I think we are in the top 3, definitely top 5 cheapest waters in the world. The only country in the Caribbean that has cheaper water than Barbados is actually Trinidad. And that's because their generation, as I said, one of the greatest input costs in the water supply is electricity. And Trinidad heavily subsidizes the electricity aspect of their water generation. So although Barbadians complain about their water bills, the fact is it's all relative. It might be high for what we are accustomed paying, but if you look at it globally, then it is pretty much nothing. If, to use an example, Madam Chair, the bottle of water that you purchase in the bottle of drinking water everybody likes to have, the normal 16-ounce bottle of water might cost you $3 to purchase. For us to generate that same amount of water, it wouldn't even cost 1 cent. That's just to put it in context. So Barbadians have gotten into the habit. We use water like if there is no cost. A year ago, I asked a hotelier on the South Coast, why don't you upgrade your plant to include water-saving devices? And he said, because it will cost me way more to install the water-saving devices than it will cost me to keep paying the water at the rates that they're at for the next 5 or 10 years. So while we complain about the cost of water, the actual cost of water relative to the rest of the world, I'm not just talking the Caribbean, the rest of the world is exceedingly cheap. Our bills are not a true representation of the cost of the water that is actually going through the pipe and the quality of the water. I just want to make that point very, very clearly. Madam Chair, I'm going to ask for Dr. Seeley to speak, to address more on the upgrade of the plants and the plans, the long-term plans for sewage and reuse of water. Dr. Hugh Seeley.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. This administration's policy is to reuse every drop that we can. So the policy will be to upgrade the Bridgetown plant and the South Coast plants to tertiary treatment. Then we have to do an... What is tertiary treatment? Tertiary treatment being that, well, we have the technology now, ministers, honorable members, to take sewage to drinking water standard. It is, the question is more what is culturally and socially acceptable rather than what is technologically possible at this stage. So we do have that technology and we can take it to that level. What is required now is the economic analysis to determine what is the best rate of return on that reclaimed water. There are several options. As I said, we could go direct toilet to tap if that was culturally acceptable. Direct reuse is what we call that. We could recharge aquifers, potable water aquifers, for example, the St. Michael aquifer with the Bell, the St. Philip aquifer with the Hampton well, with the objective of retrieving that exact water molecule for potable water use. And if we went to that stage, we would be producing water of drinking water quality, putting it back into the ground, and then abstracting it for drinking purposes. We could also irrigate crops, and we could break down that into two types of crops to make it more simple. Crops that are eaten without processing, tomatoes, lettuce, and crops that are not edible, crops that are like cotton, that you will not be eaten. So the analysis has to be done, but right now we're producing about 4 million gallons a day of wastewater, and that's being discharged to the sea. I'm adding Bridgetown and South Coast. And that could go a long way to meeting the water deficit that we have in a drought year. We think that we have a water deficit of around 7 million gallons a day. If I could add to one thing that Minister Abrams said about the value of water, the fact that when we buy bottled water, we're paying 1,000 times more for that water than when we take it out of the tap. But it gets worse than that, Madam Chair, because then when we use it in the tap, we waste 90% of it down the drain or down the toilet. And it's that 90% of the water that we want to go after and see if we can reclaim. I hope that answers the question.
While I appreciate and I understand because of where we're sitting here, that water is relatively cheap compared to other territories, I also represent a constituency that does not have a sewer system. And almost on a daily basis, I am asked why we are being asked to contribute to the sewage system when we are expected to build our own wells, to dig our own wells with little or no assistance from the government. What can I use, what can I say to comfort the people that do not contribute this? Considering some of these are farmers and they're having water bills because of the garbage. We're happy with the garbage, get me wrong, but because of this extra added addition to the bill, we are having farmers with bills $10,000 that used to be probably $6,000. What can I say to them to comfort them? Is this something that in the long run we will see dissipate, lessen, taken off the people that don't use the system? I'm asking.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. I remember 25 years, 30 years ago when we were addressing both Bridgetown and the South Coast, and the question was whether the residents, let's deal with the South Coast, whether the residents of the South Coast should pay for the South Coast system alone. And the decision then and the decision now, and I think it is a fair one, is that we're trying to protect a national asset. In the case of the coastal sewage projects, we're trying to protect our reefs. and our reefs are national assets. And therefore, I think it is fair and equitable that all Barbadians pay to protect those assets, not only those who are connected to the sewer system, because it's a national benefit.
Understood.
Madam Chair, further on that one, there's this misconception that the GSC is an increase in the cost of water in Barbados. That's a levy that the Barbados Water Authority collects for the government of Barbados. So out of the GSC monies, I think the Barbados Water Authority gets less than 17% of what is collected. The bulk of that money actually goes towards funding the Sanitation Sewage Authority. So the people who complain that Sanitation Service Authority, I got sewage in my mind. The people who complain that I don't have a sewage system, so I shouldn't have to pay that tax. Let's say we actually did go that way, all that would come off is 17%, right? You still have to pay the rest for your garbage collection. That is what the Honourable Member is using to purchase his garbage trucks. That's what the Sanitation Service Authority is using to pay the people who load and offload. That is how they're managing their office expenses and the dump. So I just want to disavow people of this misheld conception that somehow represents more money to the Barbados Water Authority towards the cost of water. The Barbados Water Authority is only a collection agent. It could equally have been somewhere else. I mean, had everybody had a telephone, a fixed line, we could probably have asked the telephone company, Flow, to collect it for us. But it falls to the Water Authority to collect it. But of that, we take less than 17%. I just want to make that very, very clear. So, and it is only for sewage. So the money that is collected by the Barbados Water Authority through the GSC cannot be used to pay our bills, pay our staff, pay anything. That is used to do the flushing of the sewer network. That is used to do any fixes at the plant. The upgrades of the plant that we're doing now have all been done through that GSC. And just so people understand the application of it, everybody remembers what happened when the sewage was coming up all the time, caused by massive blockages in the pipes. We flushed our entire sewer network, the entire Bridgetown sewer network, the entire South Coast sewer network. People would have seen last year these trucks out, these massive vacuum trucks out, flushing every single night. What people don't understand is that flushing continues every single day now. So we constantly are on a rotation, especially flushing Bridgetown, which is proving to be a problem spot with the grease. So that is where that money is going. I hope that explains it a little bit better for people. It's not that we charge you more for water. It's just that we happen to collect it for the government.
Thank you. Honourable Member, continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your kindness. Just two questions which I'll ask very closely together. Minister, you would have, you would have gone, and I've heard you before speak to this water zoning policy. I think you said you were replacing a 1964 policy. And could you please tell us a bit about that water zoning policy, what is meant to achieve, what it seeks to remedy, and how it will benefit Barbadians? And then my last question is in relation to renewable energy, Madam Chair. And I know 2030 is soon upon us, and our aspirations are to be fossil fuel free by 2030 or carbon neutral. I would just like to hear the specific plans that we have in place to guarantee that we are able to meet these aspirations that we set for ourselves as a country. Thanks.
With respect to the water zoning policy, I'm going to ask, although I think I can answer that, I'm sure that Dr. Seeley can answer that a lot better than I could. So I'm going to ask Dr. Seeley to do that one.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. The 1962 water protection policy is no longer fit for purpose. The primary objective of that water policy was to protect the public supply wells from contamination from above ground sources, primarily housing. And as we all know, we restricted development in Zone 1 areas, less restriction in Zone 2, coming down to the least restrictive Zone 5, which were primarily coastal areas. As a result of that policy, we allowed agriculture in the Zone 1 areas, relatively unrestricted agriculture in those Zone 1 areas. And as a result of that, we have nitrates in our groundwater relatively ubiquitously, in other words, all over the place. Now, I'm not saying that our groundwater is not safe to drink. Please, let me clarify. The levels are below WHO guidelines, but they are persistent and they are there. And the water that's in the ground flows towards the coast, and that's where the issue becomes. As I indicated earlier, our coral reefs are perhaps our greatest physical economic asset. And it's this contaminated groundwater flow into our near shore that is damaging our reefs. Therefore, the way that we wish to approach water protection and land use policy in the future is more of an integrated one, where we not only seek to protect the public supply well, but we seek to protect our coastlines as well. Now, there may be an immediate direct economic benefit from changing our water use policy and moving from the Zone 1 to 5 to new zones, Zones A to E. And I believe a paper has been circulated to this Parliament, or will be circulated to this Parliament, that outlines our recommendations. Because of increases in technology as well, we believe that we can reduce the radius or the diameter of that zone around the public supply well and still protect the public supply well. And therefore, when you look at the new zones, the net result of the new zones will be a release of about 4% of our land mass for development, moving from 9% of our area being Zone 1 to about 5% of our area being Zone 1. So it releases about 4% of our land area for development, which is a great direct economic benefit. However, it does also impose restrictions on houses that were not there before. For example, the use of a suckwell alone to dispose of your waste would no longer be acceptable. You would have to have some form of septic tank or some form of treatment. This is for all houses I'm referring to. And this is across the island, sir. And then all housing of a particular density that goes over a particular threshold may be required to put in a treatment plant as well. So in some areas, the areas is being relaxed. In some areas, it is becoming more stringent. But it is modernizing a policy that dates back to 1964 and is no longer fit for purpose.
Madam Chair, there's one other thing. As I said, but this segues into the honourable member's other question. We need to change the way we look at our land use and the way we conceive or we picture Barbados. So at present, all development is restricted in Zone 1 areas. But there's no good reason, for example, why you can't have wind turbines in a Zone 1 area that don't pollute the water system, but also allow agriculture to happen at the base of and around the wind turbines. So it's how can we best use our scarce land resources while still achieving the objectives that inform the first water zoning policy, and taking into consideration advancements in science and technological developments. So it is meant to free up space, but also do it in a way that doesn't actually impact or compromise our potable water system. Now, in relation to what are we doing in trying to get to 100% carbon neutral by 2030? We need, in order for us to achieve our goals, it can't just be simply generating more renewable energy. We also need to look at our consumption patterns. And this applies equally to water as it does to electricity. When someone flushes their toilet, they don't think to themselves that there's an electricity cost to that, because you don't have a wire running from your toilet. But when you flush your toilet, that water has to be replaced by being pumped somewhere for it to feed to your toilet. So there's an electricity cost to pumping. If we look at water-saving devices, let's, for example, use a water-saving toilet. A water-saving toilet would use about 1.5 gallons of water per flush. A normal toilet would use about 3 times that, 4.5 to 5 gallons per flush. So we can straight off see that if even we use water-saving devices, it helps to save water, but also brings down the consumption of electricity by the Barbados Water Authority, because you actually need to pump less water to satisfy the same need. We have to look at e-mobility. E-mobility is a fancy word for the electrification of our energy and transport sector. Our public transportation sector uses, I believe, I don't want to quote the wrong figures, but uses a large amount of fossil fuels. 33% of the fossil fuel consumption in Barbados goes to our public transportation sector. So for us to get to 100% renewable and fossil fuel free by 2030, we can no longer be contemplating a future where we're using diesel or gas burning vehicles. Now, I must commend my colleagues in cabinet, because it was 2 Thursdays ago that cabinet approved a decision, a policy, to encourage the use of electric vehicles in the government fleet. We already know that the Transport Board is looking to replace its fleet by electric vehicles. So going forward, when the Transport Board is looking to replace vehicles, it's looking to do it with electric vehicles. The government has now taken a position that effective the 1st of March next year, the policy will be to purchase electric vehicles or hybrids rather than fossil fuel consuming vehicles. There's going to be exemption there for vehicles that require, where the technology does not support the use of electric vehicles. So heavy power vehicles like garbage trucks or other vehicles like that, there can be an exemption for those, but only until such time as the technology catches up with it, because once an electric vehicle will serve the purpose, then we're looking to do that going forward. So that policy and the horizon of that policy is meant to give the car dealers notice, is meant to let people see that the government is serious about leading from in front on this one, because once Barbadians start to see more and more electric vehicles on the road, and I must thank my PS today. PS, we had a meeting to go to in lunch, and the PS insisted that we take her vehicle, the ministry's vehicle, which was an electric vehicle, as opposed to my non-electric vehicle. And we zipped up the road. I drove. I had quite a good time. But the point is, this has to become the norm. It can't be a novelty anymore. The other thing we have to do is we need not just to do energy audits in government buildings, but we also need to do energy audits in our home. Because the upfront cost of an LED bulb might be more than an incandescent bulb. But if you look at the cost savings across the life of that bulb, you save electricity. So for those who switched out and made their houses full of LED equipment, they have seen a drastic reduction in their electricity bill. And the ministry is looking this year to, in conjunction with another one, I don't want to call the partners, another one of our partners, to have a push where we try to match people. You buy one LED bulb, we give you one free. So all of these are things that we're looking to stimulate the push towards energy efficiency and water conservation that will all help to drive the consumption of electricity down, drive the cost of electricity down, and catapult us towards our 2030 goal.
Thank you.
Chairperson, I move that you now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again.
Question is that I do now report to His Honour the Honourable Speaker. progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of the Finance Committee has reported progress and asked for leave to sit again. Honourable member.
Honourable Speaker, I move that this House be adjourned for 15, suspended for 15 minutes until 5:40 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber stands suspended for 15 minutes. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. And we think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended for 15 minutes.